Hello everyone and welcome to episode 3 of the Here Be Dragons, and today we have our wonderful guest, Demeternoth. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Demeternoth, whichever you prefer, but it's often easier just to call me Deme, really. And I am, well, I started out as a WoW content creator, and I suppose now I'm an MMO content creator. And yeah, one of probably the older gamer crowd, those people over 40 that are still around
Oh,
on the
that's not me.
internet.
That's not me yet. Give me three. Give me 5 months, and then I'll be one of them.
So yeah, that's kind of me in a nutshell.
So, yeah, did you want to sort of start how you sort of came into sort of gaming generally, and WoW in a broader sense? What made
Yeah.
you pick up the game?
Um, well, I started like a lot of people of our generation, I suppose, sort of Pong is one of our earliest memories of gaming. And I did play Pong at my friend's house, my best friend's house, where they had illegal MTV and this machine that played Pong. And we didn't have any consoles or anything in my house. We had an Amstrad PC when I was about, I want to say 11 or 12, and we played a rip-off of Frogger called Hop It. And then my dad got I think it was the flight simulator trial on when he bought Windows once, and I tried that, and that was great. But that was all I had as a kid. Didn't really have anything until I got to university, and then I bought my own PlayStation. Um, and then dabbled with that. Had a PlayStation Portable for a while, which is how I got into God of War.
Oh, God of War.
Um, very topical right now. Um, and then it wasn't really until much later, um, sort of in 2009, when I was sitting on my mum's sofa. I think it wasn't the day after New Year, but I was certainly hungover from festivities. And I'd been seeing these adverts for this computer game. I didn't really know what it was, but it had William Shatner in the advert, and I'm a massive Star Trek fan. So I was like, I might just go and check this out. So I downloaded it. I could play it on a Mac laptop, um, which I still play on a Mac. Don't hate me. Um, and yeah, I started on the free trial, and I think I I played about 3 days, and then I bought a subscription, and I've played on and off ever since. Wrath was probably the most consistent expansion I'd played until BFA, because I managed to get knocked up in 2011 and had a baby in early 2012, and that anybody will be able to tell you that that kind of curtails the time you have available for gaming, particularly for an MMO when you were a raider. It's
Yeah,
just very
raid
difficult.
nights aren't conducive to children.
No, they are not. Especially not when I became a single parent as well. So it had to go on the back burner. And I've played every single expansion, but after I think Mists, I tried to raid in, and then sort of after that, I wasn't around for the launch of WoD. I came back for the end of WoD and did my garrison and was a bit kind of, yeah, this is great, but common thing
Where's
with
the rest of
garrisons,
it?
where is everyone? And then in Legion, I came back. Again, I didn't do the launch of Legion. I came back towards the end of Legion, and um, the Death Knight Order Hall as a Death Knight main was just sublime. And I still think that the Legion Order Halls are one of the best things they've ever had in the game. I think they're phenomenal. So I came back and did that. And then I wasn't at launch for BFA, but I played within the first couple of days of it launching, and I probably dipped in and out in BFA, but then about a year in, I suppose I was full on back into BFA, and I started streaming in 2019, and that was all WoW. So from then on, really, I've kind of been back until, gosh, sometime this year, January, I think I took a break. I mean, I dipped out when all the shit kicked off with
Yeah, the
Activision
dark
Blizzard,
times. Yeah.
and yeah, and I did step back then because it felt really icky. And that's when I picked up Final Fantasy. But I did then come back to WoW, I think around the autumn last year. And then in January, I was just done. I was a bit burnt out and I took a pretty extended break. I'd still dip in and out, but I certainly haven't really played consistently until Dragonflight Alpha. And yeah, just when I thought I was out, they pulled me back in. So that's kind of it, really. Yeah, that's where it brings us up to today, if you like.
So have you always been at a Death Knight? Is that what you started at?
I rolled a warrior because you had to have a level 55 character before you could
Ah,
get
yeah,
to the
you
Death
did, yeah,
Knight.
your heroic class, yeah.
Yeah, so I rolled a warrior and promptly dropped her at level 55 and went into Death Knight. I still have that warrior. I didn't delete her. She still gets leveled every expansion because I have a ridiculous need for loyalty to pixels. So she's still around. But yeah, the Death Knight is what I main. I toy with the idea of maining something else every expansion. It never happens. Shadowlands was the first expansion that I had a main alt, if that makes sense. Like before, I'd always just do the Death Knight, and this time I actually took the effort to have a mage who was at least in Nathria was raiding
Yeah.
and was all right for that. She might have done a bit of Sanctum, I'm not sure. I can't really remember. But I think this for Dragonflight, I'll be doing Hunter and Death Knight. Yeah.
Okay, because I've never really gelled with the Death Knight. I like the concept of it, but there's something about, I don't know. I find blood to be like terrifying. It's just like yo-yo health. I hate them. I hate healing them. Healing them is just like terror for like a bookie. It's like
Well,
100%, 10%, 100%, 10%. I just can't
yeah.
know. It gives me heart palpitations when I'm healing them.
There's,
Of
yeah, I think Mythic. I mean, I've tanked a few dungeons, but sort of raiding is definitely where I prefer to tank and where I feel more comfortable. And I think that's slightly different because you've got a few more.
there's other healers to
Yeah,
chip
there's
in.
other
Yeah,
healers, yeah, and I'm not. I like having another tank there and having that relationship with the other tank, which is why I sort of shy away from dungeons as a tank. But they are. I do like blood tanking. They are fun to tank.
so
So
are you pleased with the current state of Death Knight? Because obviously Death Knight tank wasn't blood originally. Was it Frost? Oh, they were all
so
kind of
yeah,
tankable, weren't they?
so
Originally.
when I was originally, you could tank in any spec. You just needed the right presence on, and you got Bone Shield, so you could effectively tank as an unholy Death Knight if you had the right presence on, because you got Bone Shield, which was like exactly like it sounds, a shield that absorbed damage. I remember one particular Hall of Lightning run where my friend Woodstone, who I believe is still around, but obviously doesn't, he's not on that account anymore. He took his Unholy Death Knight and tanked. It was towards the end of the expansion. He tanked a Hall of Lightning as his Unholy Death Knight, and I have never seen a Death Knight move that fast. It was super quick, and he never lost aggro. It was brilliant. Um, it was just a joy to behold. But when I was tanking ICC, I was I my raid leader had to have a macro to tell me to turn on blood presence because I would forget and I'd still be in unholy and I'd be like, why am I not gaining aggro? And that was what you did. You put a presence on and it got you the aggro that you needed. Whereas now it is a much more defined. This is your tank spec. This is your one-handed spec. This is your two-handed spec. Um, a bit more like warriors in that warriors obviously have the same kind of setup as two-handed, one-handed, and a tank spec, but we don't carry shields because we're hard enough without them.
So do you prefer the way it was, where it was more of a hybrid class, than where we are now, where everything's this spec is this role and it's very predefined? And
Um, I well, I'm playing a Wrath Death Knight at the moment. I'm playing one in Classic, and I did not expect this the classic to get me, but it really hasn't. I've been really enjoying it. But I'm also feeling the lack of utility. Because obviously I'm learning all my spells again, and it's quite hard. Um, I did like I mean, I have to try and remember that Death Knights were the first hero class. They were completely ridiculously OP to start with, which made them tremendous amounts of fun. Um, and I think where we are now is we're much more in line with the other classes. Um, I a part of me would prefer us still to be OP, of course. I mean, what player wouldn't want their favorite class to be OP? Um, but being more in line with the others does mean that when we are in group situations, like healers know what to expect because they're not confronted by this random DK who doesn't do everything that every other DK does, or doesn't run with a similar setup and things like that. So
Yeah.
I can understand from like a game perspective, they have to balance things. Yeah, I would like us to be OP. Of course I would.
Well, I mean, you can't be OP because Mage exists. Mage is the main character of WoW. It's just we are the
That's 'cause you're a
protagonists.
that's 'cause you're a Jaina fan. I could argue that Arthas as a Death Knight is the, main class as well.
Yeah, but one of them had ungodly powers of undeath,
Yeah, and one
and
of them doesn't.
one of them's 35 anima, and the other one is
Yeah.
still rocking and rolling and queen of everything she sees.
Yeah, I'm not a massive Arthas fangirl, so I don't
No,
mind him being 35 anima, so
I just I'm sorry. I'm gonna have an episode entirely on Jaina one day, and everyone's gonna hate me.
It's your podcast, you're allowed to indulge yourself.
Well, you get Horde fans and like, oh no, she's like a terrorist. She's awful. I'm like, is she though? Is she?
She's definitely had her dark moments,
She's had dark
and
moments, but everyone was kind of justified by her Horde atrocities. But
mm,
that's a whole other conversation.
we'll set that to one side for
Yeah.
now.
I'm sure some future guests will come on and fight me to the death on that one. Garrosh did nothing wrong and such and such.
Oh no, Garrosh did a lot wrong.
Yeah,
Garrosh did
lots
a
and
lot wrong.
lots.
That's
Lots and
why he
lots.
ended up in Revendreth. He wouldn't have ended up in Revendreth if he didn't.
He
So
also ended up as 35 anima.
yeah,
And
and a pile of ash.
a not very good cutscene, which I'm always surprised that got through. I don't quite know the story of that. I feel like there's
Uh,
more to that they'll never reveal. I don't know. Maybe Terran
yeah.
Gregory's got some secret story that you can't say, but it just felt very rushed compared to the rest of the cinematics in that raid, which it's not a great
Yeah,
raid.
I can see that. It felt a bit to me it was almost like a comedic light-hearted moment because it was a bit over the top in some respects.
Well, it's
And then
the fact
he's
that
just
a fan did like a better version of it, and
yeah.
like weeks of it being released felt strange. I don't know. I feel there's more to that we'll ever really find out.
Maybe.
Which is, I understand it from a corporate like Activision Blizz position, but you do sometimes wish you'd find out more about the behind-the-scenes stories. Like, what really happened with Wad? Like with Farallon, he was there, and then they just decided to take it out.
Mhm.
But like, what could it have been? What was the plan they had? What was the plan for the rest of Wad's storyline? Was it somebody just
Yeah,
needs to write a book of all these things that never got
that never
into the game?
happened. The alternate world of World of Warcraft
Yeah,
that could
and
have happened if these things didn't get taken out. Yeah.
but I don't think we'll ever get that because
We won't. No.
no, it's all private property. I suppose it's
It'll be private intellectual property, but also if you have that amount of back catalogue that you've not used,
you can
it's
always
still
use it
sitting
again.
there. Yeah, you
Yeah.
can always repurpose it. Absolutely.
So you played Wrath, and then you sort of you took a bit. Was it during Kata that you took a bit of a break for
Yeah, so
childcare?
I leveled up to what was 85 for Kata. Um, and that was the only time I've leveled alongside somebody That was alongside Kiddo's dad until I came back and my friend Zet and I leveled in WOD. We weren't at it, we were doing it in Chromie time by then. But yeah, so I leveled up to 85 in Kata, and we poked at some of the raids, and I suppose Kata must have come out, I want to say 2000 autumn 2010. And then I had a big belly and I couldn't sit at a desk for very long. It was quite uncomfortable. And Kiddo arrived in 2012, which meant, I wasn't able to raid. We tried in Mists. We had this team that was made up of 3 couples, all with kids around a similar age, and it was just ridiculous because one of the parents was always having to step away
Yeah.
in the middle of a fight, and that's not a good experience for anybody. And we were all understanding. We all knew that this was what was going to happen, but it just meant that we weren't able to do what we wanted to do. And it wasn't fair on the other people in the team who didn't have kids, even though they signed up knowing that's what it was going to be. So yeah, I think really at that point I had to step away from World of Warcraft, and in the interceding years, Kiddo's dad and I split up, and becoming a single parent when your child is 3 and then getting made redundant kind of took my focus for quite some time. Yeah, and I mean, I wasn't playing any other games. I had no time. I could have had time, but I didn't really have um
The
it
desire?
wasn't a priority.
Yeah,
Yeah, the
yeah.
desire wasn't there and it wasn't a priority. So I did a lot of running instead. It's crazy. Don't do it, kids. Play computer games.
Yeah, you'll never catch me doing that. So, at what point did you decide to start a guild then? Because obviously that's, as a guild leader, I know it's a big step up from just being one of the guys in the raid. It's more than just putting a raid together every week.
Yeah, so at the end of at the end of BFA, um, I'd I'd been for a very long time, I'd been with the same group of people and we'd moved across guilds. Um, and I'd been with the same group of people, and the GM that had been, or guild leader that had been there, had like stopped playing the end of Wrath, I want to say, for very good reasons. He'd stepped away, and then various different other guild leaders over the time had like taken the reins to continue that guild. But the guy that was in charge was, well, he sexually harassed me at a real life party, and I was
That's
like, oh.
a fairly good reason to leave. Yeah.
Yeah, but I stuck around for a couple of years because
Oh,
naively I thought I'll keep an eye on him and make sure he doesn't do this to anybody else. But he's just a misogynistic, narcissistic, gaslighting piece of shit, and he wasn't going to change. And a few years later, he said something in a group WhatsApp chat, and I let rip at him, and that was when the death knell fell for me on that guild, and I left and subsequently like stepped away from a lot of that group of friends, and I joined a couple of other people that had already left the guild and made friends elsewhere, and we were all kind of pottering around and it was all fine. And it got to the end of BFA and we were in there was a few of us, we all played together, but we weren't all in the same guild. And I just said, we were just all doing, well, I don't know if we were doing mythics or something, and we were just like, look, we're all a bit fed up. Shall we just go and make our own guild? And by fluke, I got to Stormwind first. So I got the guild charter. So it was an accidental guild leadership. Um, and yeah, then for a while, it was just us, and we just potted around and we were in a nice, happy place. And then I can't remember if I was streaming by then or not. I think I was streaming before we made the guild. And people started, as the sort of the stream grew, people were asking about the guild. Um, and more people started to join. And then the old guild leader, who I'd stayed in touch with, who left at the end of Wrath, we talked him into coming back, and he joined us, and kind of we went from there. Really, he was the raid leader, and we built Sticky Bandits. Kind of off the back of my stream community in terms of what the ethos for the community was. And then I took the decision to split my. I stepped away from the podcast that I'd been part of, which had sort of been where I'd been pushing my stream community, and made up my own stream community, and my own stream Discord, and kind of separated the guild a bit from the stream Discord,
Yeah.
because I wanted a space that was for the guild, that was separate, that I could kind of be a bit more anonymous in, if that makes sense. And yeah, and the guild's still going. We're the Sticky Bandits on Terracotta EU, also known as one of the sleepiest servers in the EU. But we sort of prioritize normal raiding and Mythic Plus. I have to say I haven't really raided since partway through Sanctum. I think I stepped out back in January. I'd like to think that I can get back to raiding in Dragonflight, but realistically, I don't know if I'll have time. So, and I was tanking before, and it's not fair for me to step in and say, "Oh yeah, I'll tank again," and then not be available 60% of the time.
Yeah, I think tanking and just lesser extent healing are roles where, yeah, you are just like everyone else. You're not in a position of like leadership, but you are core to the team, and
Yeah,
if you're not there, effectively the raid doesn't go ahead, and
yeah.
it, it's important that when taking on those roles that you are aware that you're taking on a little bit more responsibility than you would normally.
Absolutely, yeah. I think it's not to diminish DPS roles, but unless you have two tanks who have a good, strong relationship with each other, and this is really ironic because the best tank relationship I had was with Kiddo's dad. I mean, that completely went off the rails, understandably for other reasons, but we tanked very well together. I think probably the second best to that is with Zet, who I mentioned earlier, and Noki, who they're both outstanding tanks and gave me a lot of confidence to do what I want, what I needed to do. And that's part of being a tank as well. You have to have a good relationship with the other tank and be able to communicate and feel confident in what you're doing. And that only comes with practice, and accepting that you probably are going to screw up quite a few times, but it's okay. But it is a pivotal role in a raid team. And if you're not able to commit to the 2, 3, 4, whatever nights a week it is, it really isn't fair on the rest of the raid team. And the same with healing. I mean, I've never healed a raid, but I understand that raiding is also a pivotal role. And whilst DPS is important because you can't kill a boss without DPS, you can rotate DPS in and out slightly easier because
Yeah, it's more of you need a minimum number of DPS rather than
yeah,
exact. You
and
can't
and
go in
you're
with
all
one tank.
yeah, and I think also as a DPS, you're more individually responsible. So you're responsible for your own actions, whereas as a tank and a healer, you're also responsible for those other people. As a tank, you have to talk to your other tank. As a healer, you have to be communicating with your other healers, and whether that's sharing tactics beforehand so that you keep comms clear, or whether it's whether your raid team is a bit more like our raid team where you're a bit messier and everybody talks at the same time. That's you have to figure that out. Whereas for DPS, and I have DPS, I do DPS. I am quite happy to say that I might be disposable as a DPS. But I feel it's much more individual responsibility rather than this mechanic's about to go off. I need to get that boss before it kills my code tank or whatever. So yeah, I think hopefully I'll be able to go back and do DPS as a raider. I do want to see the raids. I just don't want to be in a place where I am letting my guild raid team down. So, and I don't raid lead. I've done a little bit,
Yeah.
but it's not for me.
I do have to do it fairly frequently as things like change and people can't always make it, but it is a role that I have basically outsourced to one of my officers because it's detrimental to me and I'm not particularly good at it, if I'm honest. And
But if you've done it and you've tried and
yeah,
you are self-aware enough to think, actually, there might be better people out there for this, that's okay.
like I mean, my origin story of WoW is I didn't actually properly start raiding until uh, very end of 8.2 in Eternal Palace,
Yeah.
and that was in pug groups. So I got my first guild in the beginning of 8.3. So my first raid was Nihilotha, and we
Wow.
went straight in at heroic, and I'd never done like any progression on normal even.
Hi, new player. Let's just drop you in at the deep end and
Yeah, I was playing a
see if you
fire
can
mage at the
swim.
time, so it was easy anyway. Combust is a win button at that point almost. Yeah, so I joined this guild, fresh recruit. This was not like a small guild; they had like good numbers.
Mm.
Before we'd got halfway through progression, I was the raid leader.
Oh,
I was an
wowzers.
officer. Um, we got curve, and then
Nice. Well done.
unfortunately, it's at that point, was being an officer, you got to see behind the curtain,
Mm-hmm.
and the other officers and senior members of the guild were not good people, to put it
Oh, dear.
nicely. And things were said which cannot be repeated about
Mm.
various people in society.
Yeah.
And myself and 3 other people in the guild, she quit the next day, and then a week later
Yeah.
formed our current guild. So we rebuilt our guild from scratch,
Yeah.
and we reprogged Nihilotha
Bloody
and got
hell.
curve again in Nihilotha.
Well done. Double
So
whammy.
I raided a lot in that tier.
Yeah.
So yeah, I I learnt from bad people, so I picked up bad habits in raid leading. But we got there in the end, and it got to the point where at the beginning of um, well, it was the beginning of the last tier Sepulchre, and I was very obviously I don't want to raid lead after the whole
Yeah.
fallout of rebuilding again for the Blizzard scandal.
Yeah.
I said to one of my officers, can you take over? I think you've got the better temperament for it. I sometimes are prone to little rage outbursts when people mess up, and I think are easy things. So I said, "Can you take over?" And unfortunately, he said yes. So
There
um,
you go.
I now get to make all the decisions, and then none of the raid leading, and it's beautiful.
Yeah. There's a way to enjoy the game as a leader, and you have to kind of, whether that's raid leading or guild leading, and you do have to kind of feel your way around it sometimes. I've had, like, when I stepped away in January, somebody else stepped in as guild leader for a few months, because I just couldn't do it. And I stepped away from the game for pretty solidly, I think 3 months. I think it was beginning of April that I came back. Um and I needed that break. I was burnt out. The raid leader that we'd had actually dislocated his shoulder. So he wasn't able, or broken it, I can't remember which, maybe both. But he wasn't able, we basically had a one-handed raid leader, so he wasn't able to play for a while. So I was raid leading. I think I was definitely tanking because I was tanking in Sanctum. So I was raid leading, tanking, and guild leading, and it was too much, and it burnt me out. Um, so thankfully he was back by then, and he actually took the reins of the guild for a little while.
I actually
Um,
know this guy, and can we explain to people? We're going to out him now. How did he break his shoulder?
uh, he was doing something stupid at a fireworks display in a car park. I can't remember exactly what it was he did.
I believe he was doing the Naruto run.
Yes, that was it. He was doing the
Yeah,
Naruto run, and he tripped,
yeah.
and obviously as he fell, his shoulder took the whole weight
See,
of the
anime was a
fall. So
mistake.
So he was, he was properly banged up, ninjured, bless him.
Yeah.
So it was a lot. I was doing a lot. And at that point I was still self-employed, which anybody who's been a single parent and self-employed, my hat goes off to you. I did it for 7 years. It's hard work. It was all too much. And something had to go. So I stepped away from the podcast that I'd been hosting, and I stepped away from WoW for a bit. And yeah, it was the right move for me at the time. And I came back proper, like, I dabbled here and there. I did the odd thing, but yeah, I came back properly for Dragonflight Alpha. Thank you very much, Blizzard. And I'm very excited for it now. So yeah.
Yeah, so obviously you played the alpha and the beta and PTR and everything in between. How do you feel that it's changed for in terms of suiting your ability to play, like raiding, for example? You don't have to do so much catch up. Basically, you don't have to do the mythic
Yeah.
pluses. You don't have to do AP grinds. You can literally raid log. I mean, as far as we all know, this is speaking pre-launch. You
Yeah.
can just raid log, and that's going to keep you geared and
That will,
competitive.
for me, as a person who is short on time, that my hope is that that's how it stays. One of the reasons I didn't come back for Sepulchre was because I looked at all the things I had to do. I had to get another Lego. I had to get this. I had to like gear everything up again. And I had to unlock Zareth Mortis, which I hadn't really done. And it was a lot. And I just went, I don't have the interest to go out and do all of this to go into a raid. And that's a shame that was a barrier. Because I understand, right? So there is an element where not everybody is physically going to be able to do every piece of content. It's just not how the game works. Unless you're Annie Fuchsia and can go and get all the achievements. I mean, that's astonishing. But
One day,
like,
I'm going to do it. One day.
But it's, as an average Joe working a Monday to Friday 9 to 5 with other commitments outside of the game, to look at all the things that it was just completely overwhelming. And the only time I'd felt that before really was when I'd first decided to tank in Wrath, and my friends had said, we'll get you the gear, don't worry, and we will teach you. And we ran dungeon after dungeon after dungeon to teach me and to get me the gear that I needed. But that was all I needed. I just needed the gear drops. I didn't need some borrowed power or to grind out a different currency or a soul ash, cinder, whatever, or an azurite or anything else. I just needed to get the gear. And that was so simple and so easy to understand, even though it felt a bit overwhelming. And it does feel like Dragonflight is that way again. I have incredibly, I thought I was going to go and get Slime Kitty, and I got my character in a position that I could have gone and got Slime Kitty, and then I've just not had the time to do it.
I mean,
but I did.
Yeah, you do technically still have time, but it's very tight
All
at the
the
moment.
inclination, yeah. So yeah, I mean, I got her the tier pieces. I got her the second Lego. I got her, what she needed basically to be able to, for me to feel comfortable that I could take her on a Slime Kitty run and not be completely shit and terrible for all the other players in the group. And then I was just like, actually, I don't really want to do that. I want to farm mounts and level my alts, and yeah. But anyway, I mean, that's by the by. But it took me a while to do that, and I had to grind out Zareth Mortis. So Dragonflight feels much more back to basics, and much more kind of, I don't want to say open, but
Less
more
restricted.
Yeah, it's less restricted. It's more in terms of how you get gear. It feels more accessible, which I think can only be a good thing. It's, you want people to be able to see a clear progression in gear and to say, right, I do heroic dungeons, I get gear for mythic dungeons. I do mythic dungeons, I'll get gear, which is infinitely scalable and whatever. And if you raid, you get something comparable. I found I have found recently the whole thing that Mythic Dungeons gear better than raids a bit weird. Um, because to me they're still 5-man content and 10-man, 25-man, 20-man, whatever content you're doing in raiding. It's I don't want to say it's harder than keys because I don't think that's a fair comparison. I think they're very different styles of play, but raiding requires cooperation between more people, and I think that makes it infinitely harder because people can be interesting
Yeah.
in a raid scenario, you know. So I think there is an argument that raid gear is a higher level and is therefore potentially harder to acquire. But I also recognize that Mythic Plus is its own thing. I'm pushing I mean, I think the most key I've ever done is a 12. So I am not a regular Mythic Plus person, but I watch other people do them. And I'm like, yeah, there's a lot of skill involved and a lot of hard work. And I think that should be rewarded. I potentially think maybe Mythic Dungeons were a mistake. Maybe they could have. I don't. I mean, if you like 5-man content, they're great. But the gear thing,
Is it the fact that
I
it's endless repeatable? So
it's
you
endless.
raid
Yeah,
once a week, kill a boss, you get a drop, or you don't get a drop, and that's it. Whereas Mythic Plus, you just keep doing it and doing it and doing it. Eventually, it will drop, in
yeah.
theory.
I think there's an argument that like Mythic Plus is there. Oh. So I can see a lot of positives in Mythic Plus. Like it's exciting, it's fast paced. You know, you're against a timer. You can farm gear from them. It's a tight 5-man group. And if you get a regular fight, I mean, at end of BFA, all I did was run Mythic Plus, and that was what I did, and I did enjoy it. I do enjoy them when I get a good group, but I find the idea that gear from Mythic Plus outstrips gear from raids um, a little weird, especially if you're doing a heroic raid. To me, you know, coming from the Wrath perspective, if you had normal or heroic, and that was all you had on raid, the idea to me that you can go into a 5-man dungeon and get a better level of gear than a heroic raid seems it just doesn't sit well with me. But I don't know what the answer is. I am not a game dev. I don't have the information at my fingertips, and I don't want to piss on other people's parade. So if you know, I do enjoy Mythic Plus when I feel confident in there, and I have a group that I know will forgive my ineptitude at times. Um, so I don't know what the answer is, but it does irk me a little bit that I can run a 5-man dungeon and get a better gear than I could in a raid. So I don't know what the answer is. I do like that Dragonflight doesn't have borrowed power and seems to have less systems for us to get caught up in because that put me off at the end of Shadowlands. Big time.
I
It
will
felt like a
say
huge barrier.
the gearing levels within Dragonflight have been adjusted so that raids are always going to be the highest level. Well, obviously,
Mm,
Heroic has a cap to which steps into Mythic, but
yeah,
Mythic Plus is no longer going to outstrip Heroic in all cases.
which is a good move in my
Yeah.
opinion.
Now, I do both types of content. I do Heroic and I do keys,
Yeah,
and I do understand the sort of situation you get where you if you're not, we don't tier, we clear the content on Heroic, but we're not doing it like week 1 or week 2, week
yeah,
3. So when we finally get progression down a couple of weeks into the tier, you're often getting loot from the last boss, which is a lower level than what you've got, and it does
yeah,
kind of feel a little bit defeating. That you're like, well, why am I going to farm this? Because
yeah,
what's the farm? I'm not. There's nothing there for me personally.
yeah.
So you end up raiding for your guildies who don't particularly do Mythic Plus, so they get the gear.
Yeah.
or the fact you just like raiding. I just like raiding. I'd raid for no loot. I'm happy to do that. I just like the process of doing it. I mean, I've not. When was the last time I've only missed one raid with all my guilds, and that was earlier this year when my computer died.
Oh no.
So yeah, luckily I'd cleared the content on another character earlier in the week, but that particular guild night, I yeah, I didn't have to be something on that character, and just very frustrating the fact that I sat
Yeah.
there and watched it on Twitch because somebody was streaming it
Oh
for me, and
gosh.
I was raid leading from Twitch. It was with like a 5 second delay. It was not a fun experience, I'll tell you that.
No. No.
Um, yeah, it was. I do understand the frustration of raiding not quite being the pinnacle of content anymore,
Yeah,
and
and
I think they have changed that in some ways, but
it sounds like they have changed it, which is good. I mean, I like for all the time I spend watching Mr. GM, I am not up to date with what's happening. I don't know what's coming in, and I wait until I'm told, and that's
yeah,
fine. Um,
that's what I'm for. I'm just there to tell people. I just
yeah.
People just message me in the Discord like, okay, so I've seen all these messages, but I don't understand it. Can you just tell me what's happening? It's like, okay, here's
Yeah.
the TLDR.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, if they've made a change that gives the raid gear a bit more um higher eye level or whatever, then
Yeah.
I'm all for that. I don't want to belittle Mythic Plus. I really don't want to belittle Mythic Plus. I think, like I say, people that are skilled and can do Mythic Plus, I take my hat off to them. I really do. Um, and they should be rewarded for that. But you could argue that there is a mount for that and titles and things like that as well. So um, yeah, I mean, it's a hard balance, and as I say, I don't have the answers. So
So speaking of sort of different types of play in the game, you went off and during one of your breaks to play Final Fantasy, which is a
I
very
did.
different sort of play style. So
It is.
how would you compare the two to sort of someone who's not played Final Fantasy?
Well, do not go into Final Fantasy expecting it to be like WoW, first of all. Yes, the general MMO vibe is there, but do not expect to be spending your time hitting things because certainly for the A Realm Reborn 1 to 50 experience, you will spend a lot of time uh, getting exposition and story more than you will spend hitting stuff. And some of the characters might be a tad annoying and frustrating and grating, and that's okay. It's so I love WoW lore. I also love the story of Final Fantasy, and one of the things about Final Fantasy that it does so well is that there is this thread of story that that each expansion is its own sort of huge, great big story arc. It's so well written, and there's this thread running through the background that keeps ticking over, that keeps linking in to what you're already doing, and that goes all the way back to A Realm Reborn. But it's one of the things that stood out to me immediately was that there's no faction. You are not the player base is not split, so there's no automatic animosity,
Yeah,
and they're very uh um anti add-on. So things like DPS meters, they exist, but they're against the TOS. The general kind of vibe, and do not take my word for this because I will not be held responsible if you get banned for using a DPS meter. But the general vibe is that you can have a DPS meter for your own information. You cannot use it to berate somebody else. As soon as you do that, you get it's like an instant ban. But the fact that there's no DPS meters instantly takes a lot of pressure off. However, there aren't really DPS meters because it's a very homogenized fight style. So if you are surprise, surprise, I play a sword wielding melee DPS character, a samurai.
I thought you were going to
Um,
play. Was it the Reaper, the Death Knight type?
I will be, so there's a Dark Knight, which is a tank, and there is a Reaper, who is another melee DPS. And I will be playing all of them. There is a title, God or Goddess of War, which you need to do all of the physical damage classes. So that's the melee DPS, the physical range DPS, as opposed to the magical DPS, and the tank classes. And I was like, yeah, fine, I can do that. I'll have that, thanks. But yeah, so it's quite homogenized. So, for instance, the tanks all have a stance that they have to turn on. There is there's a couple of cooldowns called, I can't remember what they're called now, but you'll have the same cooldowns, which are your kind of damage mitigation buttons, and they'll be the same across various classes.
Yeah, well, there's no talents either, is there? So every
No,
tank is the same as the next tank.
yeah, there's no talents. So although there are some, I want to say, like, there's more classes than WoW, but obviously WoW has specs within classes, which this does not.
A
So
spec is almost a class, though. At this
yeah,
point
if
now,
I
they
mean,
are so different from each other.
yeah. So it's a much more homogenized combat style. Um the world itself, so each zone doesn't join up to the next zone. You go through you'll have to go through a loading screen each time you change zone, which is initially was a bit jarring, but now that I'm used to it, it's fine. You can teleport around as opposed to flying around, and actually that's really quick and handy, and I quite like that as a movement mechanic. Your character is the center of the story, and it is written in such a way that you are important and you are the center of the story. And
So how
the
does the game handle like your fellow players in that sense? Because in WoW,
so
whenever we as players do things, it's the champions. It's though we
yeah,
are a group of people, and it's like
yeah.
it takes away that "oh, you're the savior" sort of aspect.
So in terms of, like, you can, up to a certain point, you can actually play Final Fantasy as a single player, because they now have a thing called the trust system, where if you want to go in and do a dungeon on your own, you can take a bunch of NPCs and they will come in with you, and fulfill the other roles. But the way it handles, like, you being the center of the story, when you go into group content with other players, they there is a line somewhere where they say these are the other warriors of light from the other shards of the system, because what, so I still haven't got my head quite around
So
this,
it's like a
but
multiverse, alternate
it's kind of, yeah,
universe type.
it's kind of like a multiverse. And so they're the other warriors of light from those multiverses, basically. Which, it's fine. There are elements in all well, the 3 MMOs that I've played. I've dabbled in Guild Wars 2, but I wouldn't say I really played it. So let's stick with
Yeah, the
Final
same.
Fantasy and
I
WoW.
couldn't tell you a single thing about
Yeah.
that. About having max
Um
level characters.
yeah, but there are MMO parts in both games where you have to suspend the story for the gameplay, and you have to, like, accept that to enable this to work as a piece of gameplay, this part of the story has to sort of be suspended for a bit. Um and that's okay. There is not an ugly NPC in the entirety of Final Fantasy that I have come across.
Oh, I don't know about
Um
that. There's a couple of ugly models I've seen, and people praise the graphics. I'm like, there's some images of that MXL guy which look vaguely PlayStation 1 era.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I don't like, one of the things that kept me away from it for quite a while was the graphic style. The it it's not, you can, again, don't use mods, but you can get a mod that changes the colors a bit more. Um so I found it, when I was watching other people play it, I thought it was really washed out. I didn't think it was very colorful. I didn't think it was very pretty. Boy, did I change my mind when I started playing it. the thing that stands out for me, and this is where WoW has caught up a bit, and I hope continues to catch up, is the level of character customization. And this is why there are very few, or I still don't think there's an ugly player character. I don't like Emmett Silch, so I would accept that some people love him, but I don't think there's an ugly player character, because the level of customization on the screen, on your character creation screen, is incredible. And that I really liked, which I'm pleased that WoW has caught up with. And their transmog or glam system, there's no, like, you have class specific items, but it's not fixed onto what armor material they are. So as a samurai, sometimes some of my outfits are all plate, some of my outfits look like cloth, some of my outfits look like leather, and it doesn't matter. And there's also items that you can find in the game or that you can purchase through the store. Let's not get too up on buying stuff in
Oh,
a
yeah.
game. But you can buy biker jackets or pink hoodies or summer bikini outfits if you so desire. You can earn those through events and things. So the options for playing dress up are incredible. And I think there's a couple of things. So the options for playing dress up are great. The storage is a bit limited, like where WoW has unlimited transmog storage, and obviously that's why people go out and collect so much of it, because we don't have a limit on it. There is a limit in Final Fantasy, but the stuff that is available to glam is so pretty and so varied, and they are removing a lot of the gender specific stuff that they've had before, which is great. And some of the newer things are not gender locked anyway. So I think that's really, really positive. But yeah, the gameplay, do not start Final Fantasy thinking you're going to get a combat game, or the level of combat that you have in World of Warcraft. You're not. You're going to get a phenomenal amount of story, an incredible community, who, in my experience, have been supportive, welcoming, delighted, frustrated along with me. They feel all the emotions that I'm going through, and it has been an emotional roller coaster. WoW has only made me cry a couple of times. Final Fantasy's made me cry almost non-stop on some occasions. It really knows how to pull the heartstrings, and I think a lot of that is probably down to whoever translates it from the original Japanese into English for the voice actors, because however they are translating it, it is phenomenally well written and well acted by the voice actors. And it really it's charming and a very kind of, it's got its tongue-in-cheek moments. It's also got its moments where it is deeply frustrating. And it's not a perfect game. I don't think WoW is a perfect game either. But I have a lot of fun playing it, and I've really enjoyed it. I mean, I've been playing it for over a year, and I haven't got to the final expansion yet, or to the most recent expansion. And there'll be another one out next year, and I'll probably still only be playing Endwalker by then. But I think if you don't go into it expecting it to be like World of Warcraft, and you just want to explore it and see what this is like as an experience, it's well worth the time. I did an interview, like, this is a long time ago. This is probably, I want to say, before we started the third faction or just after. There was a podcast called Stories Around Azeroth, I think it was. With one of the hosts was Frasley, and I'm really sorry, I can't remember the other guy's name, which is shocking. But the other guy, at this point, I hadn't played Final Fantasy, and he wanted to talk about the comparisons, and I couldn't comment. But I get it now because I've played them both. And I think there is a lot that WoW and Final Fantasy can learn from each other.
So,
But I like that they're separate entities as well.
can I just touch on something you said regarding story? Because you said there's like it's an
Mm,
overarching story,
mm,
multiple expansions long.
mm.
See, a criticism I often hear about WoW is that every story it's always leading on to the next thing. There's never like a conclusion. It's like, oh, we've fought Gul'dan and he's run away to Legion, and then we're in Legion, and then Saga starts sword into the earth, which leads to BFA, and then the sword's there in BFA, and we heal Azeroth, and then N'Zoth appears, and then that leads us to Sylvanas
Yeah,
taking it, and it's like there's never an answer or a
there's no
conclusion.
satisfying conclusion. Yeah,
Whereas you hear people talk about Final Fantasy and having a multi-year arc, and it's a positive thing. And
yeah.
is it the way it's handled, or is it?
It's so the problem I think that WoW has is that at the end of each expansion, we don't necessarily feel like we've completed the story of that. And you've given the perfect example of like Gul'dan goes here, he does this, then we move into Legion and he does this, then Sargeras stabs the world, then that gives us BFA, then BFA leads us into Sylvanas destroying the Helm, and then we're going to the Shadowlands. But even though we have those end raids, it doesn't feel like a completed story. At the end of the last expansion that I completed, which was Stormblood, so Final Fantasy has you have your main expansion play, and then you have your 1, 2, and 3 patches, and it's always the same. Same kind of cadence, same kind of rhythm. Sometimes there's additional ones. Like I think after Heaven's Ward, there's like a 3.3 or 3.4 and 3.5. Anyway, but those lead into the next expansion. So the first like patches for, let's say, patches 1 and 2 after a main expansion will tie up that story. And then patch 3 leads you into the next one. So there will be some loose ends each expansion, and those are the ones that go through. But the main story of that expansion is always tied off with a bow, absolutely beautifully. At the end of Stormblood, they give you a Disney-esque sing-song thing going on, which was probably wasn't my favorite bit, if I'm honest. But the rest of it that then led into Shadowbringers had me bawling my eyes out like a child. I had a very strong emotional response to it. And it feels they let you know when that is the end, and they run the credits. You know, it's like you've
Like
been in a movie and they're
yeah.
running the credits and everything. And that kind of level of this bit's done now. You can move on to the next bit. This has all been tied off with a bow. Here's the next quest whenever you're ready. And funnily enough, Final Fantasy tells you regularly, go and take a break. Your character is told regularly, it's time you had a rest. That doesn't happen in World of Warcraft. I've never known them to say to my character, you've done really well today. Why don't you go and get some rest and recuperation?
Have you not seen the latest patch though? If your character has not been back to your faction capital for a long time, you get a little pop up saying, maybe you should go back to Stormwind. Because I logged into an old character and it was like, oh, okay, then I will. And obviously, I think it's an attempt to get, like, here's a free Hearthstone to get you back to your capital to pick up
Yeah.
the launch quest for the new expansion.
Yeah.
But I just thought, okay then, yeah, sure, I'll go home.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. I wish they did that a bit more often, but I would, there's no kind of this is one of the other issues I have with World of Warcraft. I've played a Death Knight, the same Death Knight since Wrath of the Lich King. She's been my main. She has done umpteen wars now. I think I've lost count, and she is still physically unharmed. Okay, she's a Death Knight, but like, and she could be
being dead is pretty harmed.
Yeah, but she could be like blind in an eye, but that's it. I can't give her. I want to be able to have the option to have prosthetic limbs because we have mechanomes. There is no reason that we could not have prosthetic limbs, and I think MMOs in general like should have a bit more visibility of people who are not as able-bodied as the rest of us. And I think if you've survived a certain amount of wars, why would you not have these things? And there was a time
yeah, you could
when
have like a druid arm, but it's like grown it yourself out of tree roots.
Yeah. There was a time when I can't remember his name, Thrall's old shaman buddy. It's not Nazgrim because he's my Death Knight.
When you talk about horde stuff, I've already lost
Yeah,
interest.
I'm sorry, but there was a time when he was depicted in game in a wheelchair, and then suddenly he wasn't,
Oh,
and it was like, why is he?
is it E-Trig?
Can we? No,
That's
no, it
two
wasn't
orcs I know.
E-Trig.
There we go. We're done.
Well done. I want to say it began with N, but I can't remember. Anyway, I'm really sorry to all the Hordies that I've just offended. But yeah, I think that, why can we not have that? Why can we not have like a veteran? We've got an orphanage in Stormwind. Why can we not have a veterans home?
I think
Or a recuperation area or something. But I mean, I know I've gone completely off the point there, but
no.
I think there's
I think you're
scope for
talking
that.
about a larger sort of. Well, it's a cross between is it a time skip, which we technically have had, but
Hmm.
what its outcomes are is difficult to truly.
Yeah,
Apart from a wedding that was between two horde leaders,
which we didn't see.
we did well. You don't you don't know. I'm still thinking there'll be things hidden. I'm sure there'll
I
be like
hope
a.
so. I hope so. But yeah, I think, the Final Fantasy is very good at tying off each expansion and letting you know this is the end of this part. And you know that there's still things underlying that you're going to pick up and take and carry on with. But it's very, very good at putting that bow on at the end. And I think WoW lacks a degree of that. And it's a shame because there are this is also part of WoW's problem. I think some of the leveling experience in Shadowlands was exceptional because the whole thing flowed through as one story, and that was expertly done. I thought that was great. If you But you go further back, and so many stories are left not tied off. You know, there's just
I mean, the whole Drust thing.
yeah, there's a
Yeah,
Drust thing. There's Malfurion sitting up there twiddling his thumbs. Tarandi always has to go out and do all the work. There's Gilneas still sitting there
too
that
soon.
hasn't been.
Oh, they gave us a smidgen of hope with that Lordaeron, claiming
Yeah,
Lordaeron quest when they were like, when Kalia sent getting a message saying, "And we'll start the removal of troops." I'm like, do it
yeah,
faster.
yeah.
If we had a time skip, it doesn't take 2 years to get all of them out.
No,
Just
and
do
it's
it.
been, Gilneas has been that way for a very long time, and there's just been no progression on that bit of
I think that
story, and
ties
it's so
into a world
frustrating.
revamp, and a world revamp, I think, is something that is so big and so time consuming, and
Yeah,
potentially it's not going
I
to
don't.
cost us a raid to you. It costs you an expansion, and I
Yeah, and
think
I
they
don't think
are.
we'll get another one. I think it'll be
No,
WoW 2.0. I
I,
think they'll just reset the whole thing and start again. I don't see how they can do a world reset and continue with this universe. I think they'd have to start a whole new universe.
it'll be the point where the game engine physically can't handle
Yeah,
anymore. They're always.
yeah.
It's not the same engine it was 20 years ago,
No,
18 years ago. But they're like bolting things onto the side, and eventually it's just
it's
gonna
gonna fall
fall
over.
over. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. Of
um,
course it is.
'cause especially with the changes in the last 12 months, with all the people leaving. I mean, good. A lot of those people were awful people, but they had a lot of knowledge about the core systems, and then all these new people coming in with new ideas got to unpick this code
Yeah.
and make it work basically. And that's not an easy task to keep
No,
that going.
and it's um like you've just we got a world reset in Kata, and I think they told the story they wanted to that they didn't get to complete in Warcraft or the RTS game. They got more story in and were able to do that, and I think that's why they did the reset then. I think we've we've been told that the end of Shadowlands marks the end of a certain period of World of Warcraft. And I'm quite glad to see the back of that period. Um, I find a lot of the unsatisfaction at the end of an expansion quite frustrating. Um, and that's part of why I stopped playing Shadowlands. Despite all the systems and being burnt out on raiding, the story, um, I really hope that they just do not bother following up on Zoval saying there is a bigger threat, whatever it was he said, because I don't care. I
I
do not care.
I do
I'm done.
think
I'm
that
over it now.
I think that will tie in to whatever happens at the end of this raid, the first raid, because
Mm.
Ian or Steve or somebody, one of the devs said by the end of the raid's cutscene, you will know who the big threat is at the end of this
Yeah.
expansion. And having seen the pre-launch cutscenes, like the animatics, it looks like it's Void and Old Gods again. And I was wondering, are we finally going to get the Void Lords?
I th-
And I think I wouldn't be surprised if that's the way they go.
like, oh, I don't know how I feel about that. um, I just, oh, yeah, I don't know how I feel about that. But I think this is part of the problem with WoW. It's shot itself in the foot. Um, I mean, all I know about Endwalker in Final Fantasy is that we go to the moon. That's all I've heard. So I've heard that as a meme, and I'm a bit like, okay, this is interesting. But everything else has taken place. The last. So where am I up to? I'm on the fourth expansion, the third expansion. Out of, and obviously after the original, so fourth part, if you like. And every part of that has taken place on this planet, on Nail Zero, or whatever it's called. It's all taking place on that same place. And oh no, God, no, it hasn't. I take that back. I've just spent the entirety of Shadowbringers on a different realm. Um,
You could have told me
oh,
anything, I
now
would
I,
have believed you.
yeah, no, I've just spent the entirety of it on a different realm, and that's just blown my stupid little mind a little bit. Now I need to rethink everything that I was about to say. I
I would
didn't.
I would say
So
that the
there is.
fact is that you said that you've been playing this long and you don't know how it ends
No, I don't know.
because, and I'm very much a case of keep story off the PTR. The fact is that we'll know how the raid ends within 12 hours of the raid being released,
Yes.
and I think often that follows that's ahead of any story chapters that take place in the preceding time, and I think that does kind of spoil
Yeah, it
the
can.
story because
Yeah.
people will read or watch this cinematic outside of any context and then jump to a conclusion which hasn't been set up or presented properly.
Mhm.
Go, I hate that, and then that's it. It's fixed in their
Yeah.
mind. And then when they do see it in game, they skip it because they've killed the
They've
boss. They
already
don't care.
seen it. Yeah.
I've seen this.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. So they lose the story in the moment where
See, I think that this comes. So Final Fantasy doesn't do any beta testing or PTR testing. It's all, you get the game. That's it. But I think that's a luxury for them because they don't have to balance the classes.
yeah.
And part of beta and PTR for WoW is balancing the classes. And the payoff is that they have to release story alongside that testing.
But they've
And
proven they don't need to do that because they did that with
there's a,
the story campaign in Shadowlands.
yeah, so but there is a degree of it. There is a degree of it that you can't hide because you can put cutscenes in that are work in progress or whatever, but there's always data mined stuff with voice lines and things like that
Mm.
that comes out. So I think you can hide a certain amount of it in WoW, but not all of it. I agree with you that it should be kept off the PTR as much as possible. But I think that is part of the nature of World of Warcraft is because we have X amount of classes and specs to test, they have to do beta testing. And unfortunately, the payoff of that is that we do get some spoilers and stuff ahead of time. But yeah, I mean, it's just the way it has to be, because that's it's a combat game, much more so than Final
Mm.
Fantasy. And I enjoy it. Of course I do. I wouldn't be playing it again now. And there are problems with WoW. There are problems with Final Fantasy. I mean, just in the last 10 days, the head of the Final Fantasy studio came out and said some absolutely ridiculously racist stuff.
Oh yeah, I saw that, and I was more shocked at the people who defended him for saying that. It can be a
Yeah.
translation error. I understand that, but there were people defending his point as though what he said was 100% accurate, and that is like,
Oh, yeah. No, but it
it
so,
yeah, it's like,
uh,
you always built up so much goodwill. Why don't we just trust him on this? It's like,
'cause it's bullshit.
yeah,
It's not accurate. I mean, for anybody who doesn't know, so Yoshi P, who is the much lauded head of the Final Fantasy 14 studio, as far as I'm aware, that's the best way to describe what he is. Um, said that in the Final Fantasy 15 game that
it was
they are
16, 16.
16, sorry, yeah, 16. They are not putting in people of color because they didn't exist in medieval Europe, which is a lie, frankly. And anybody who lives in Europe currently or has studied any type of history will be able to tell you that because, yeah,
Because the
the
Silk Road was a thing, and trading was a thing, and
yeah,
yeah,
and
the, we
like
had
the
we had
Greek
we had
Empire.
Moorish Spain. We had
Yeah, yeah,
it's
and the
just
Greek Empire was from North Africa all the way up. The Romans, who took over from the Greeks, came as far north as Britain. Somebody on the reply said, "Didn't the Romans visit Britain?" I'm like, dude, they were here for like 400 years.
just once or
They did
twice.
a little bit more than visit for a vacation.
Yeah,
Um,
there were African soldiers who settled here
yeah,
for, well, settled here, so were here for centuries later.
yeah, absolutely. And then when we had the Vikings, and even within the UK, we had mixes of people, and you know never mind Europe itself. So to say that medieval Europe was had no people of color in it is
Yeah,
incredibly stupid.
and even if it is that was true, you're not you're basing it on Europe, but it's not Europe. It's not.
Actual Europe,
Yeah,
yeah. And you've got a game where you've got cat people and bunny people, and you're okay with that being part of a fantasy. So what are you doing,
yeah. Well, look, when you can have a Culturian type character in Final Fantasy 14, then I might come back. Look,
Yeah, I would like
where's
there
my
to
representation? I want to be a fat man.
I would like there to be more body diversity in Final
It's
Fantasy.
that's one of my
It
big gripes about the game is it's just two body types with different ears for a lot of the characters.
Yeah, there is an element of that. That is where one of the customization types lets it down, and I think that's the same in World of Warcraft as well. I think, for a human male mage to look like he's a gym bro is a bit silly. Um, you know,
Yeah.
we should have sliders on that sort of stuff.
Well, they are at least making some progress on that, but
We're getting there, yes, and I don't wanna belittle the Drakthir customization list is incredible, um, and that's
yeah,
great, and I don't wanna belittle how far we've come, but I do think we've still got a long way to go in
see
both of them.
that's a weird one, the Dracthea one, because whilst I do see what they're trying to say with the Dracthea, they want a big beefy Dracthea body. It implies more than that, in my opinion. It's trying to say I want a man's body, and it's like, well, the Dracthea, they're not going to have that.
They're lizards.
The
They're
lizard,
n they're not masc or femme,
yeah,
so
you have like they're called Draconids, and they're a different race. What you're asking for
yeah,
exists, but they're not a playable race.
yeah,
It could be a
yeah.
race, but then there's lots of, like, where are the Nagas? Where are the um,
Tuskar.
Tuskar or Ethereals? There's lots of races that could be in the game.
Yeah,
I don't
yeah,
know.
and in their Drakthir form, or their, um, ethereal form, they might be non-gendered.
I
They
wish,
don't have to
I
present as
just
masc or
wish you
femme.
could be any of the existing races as a visage. Where's the gnome?
That would be very clever,
Chromie is a
yes.
dragon who can be a
Yeah,
dwarf
a
and a
gnome.
gnome. Why can't the Dracthea be typical Tyrans or trolls or
Yeah.
goblins or whatever.
I think they did miss a trick, and I
Yeah,
suspect it's a time limitation again, because the amount of coding they'd have to do for that must be phenomenal. Um,
yeah. I suppose I'm not a fan of the visage forms. How they look.
I do like them,
I
but
find them
I do agree that we
the
should have
scaly
any
horny
race.
mix really weird looking. The Dracthea themselves, I love that customization. It's brilliant. But the humanoid forms kind of looks a bit weird, and I don't quite love it. And as soon as I found out you could have a hornless version, I was like, okay, I'm having one without horns. 'Cause I think the horns are the weirdest part about them.
Mine will basically look as close to Alexstrasza as I can make her, because I am a Alexstrasza fangirl. So
I want, I
I
want,
will.
I want to see if I can make a Dracthea who looks like Sonic. I want him
I bet you could.
like electric blue with lots of spikes, and I'm
Yes.
gonna give him a speed set, and he just
I know
can.
exactly what I'm doing after dinner tonight.
There we go. Well, you can do that, and I've got my new character who is an Affliction Warlock called Rodotnik.
No,
So
yes.
he's gonna run.
Love it.
I'm gonna chase you around in my little
Okay.
ship, and we can free all the little animals from little cages. It'll be,
I love
oh,
it.
see, RP. This is RP in the action.
There is. There is.
Okay, so I think we'll call it there for today. So if you want to give your little shout out to all your social media where people can find you, I'll
Yes.
do that. Shout.
So you can find me pretty much everywhere, I think, online at Demeternoth, which is Demeternoth. Probably the best place to find me is Twitter or Twitch. I do have YouTube as well. And those are kind of the places that I concentrate myself. So yeah, so it's Twitter or Twitch at Demeternoth, which is Demeternoth.
And that's it for today then. So thank you very much, and hopefully we'll have a very special episode coming very soon. Okay, thank you very much. Bye bye.
Thanks. Bye.